The next one I'm going to talk about here is Oscar Romero. Oscar Romero, he was a Roman Catholic Archbishop of San Salvador, which is down in Central America. It faces the Pacific Ocean. Back in the 1970s, 40% of El Salvador was owned by 13 families. And it was a country rich in coffee production, for one thing, and it had other kinds of agricultural things that made people wealthy, but 13 families owned 40% of the country. Imagine the economy all wrapped up with this little group of people. Sound familiar? What are we saying today? That 1% of the economy in this country controls something like half of the revenue of the country?
High 40%.
High 40%. Okay, so anyway, here's Oscar Romero. And here's the thing about Romero. He taught in a seminary. He was all full of theology in his head. And that's not wrong to study and to teach theology about God. That's what he did. They made him archbishop. In fact, it was the conservative bishops that made him archbishop, because the conservative bishops were lined up with the 13 families. And there's murder going, literal murder going on, but thousands of people were dying by the week through murder squads that were pretty much hired by these 13 families and other people like that, because these people who were being cheated, the poor, the campesinos, were being cheated by the government and by the powerful families. They elected him, the conservative bishops elected him, because they figured he won't make any waves. But he knew a priest. He had actually ordained a priest, a Jesuit priest. And within weeks of that priest's ordination, he was viciously assassinated. And the archbishop went and saw his friend, who had just ordained, assassinated in a horrible, shameful way. And that turned him around. He devoted the rest of his time saying, this is wrong. It is wrong that so few people control the economy and really oppress the poor. And he had a radio station, he talked about it, he became the one hope that these people had, the one hope that they had. And he too knew he was walking the path, the inevitable path. And he was saying Mass one day, 1980, in a chapel. Somebody shot him right in the middle of the Mass, killed him. Okay, this woman here, she lives over a little more than a mile from here. She lives a block from where I work at Ascension Parish. She lives on the corner of 16th and Bryant. She was raised on the north side of Minneapolis, African-American woman, grew up in the Baptist tradition. She knew this gospel well. She really knew it and knows it. And especially the part in there about forgiveness. Remember the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. What it means is, God, forgive me, but I don't expect any more forgiveness from you than I'm willing to give everybody else. Forgive us our trespasses. She knew about forgiveness. It was the big thing that challenged her life. Why? Because you see the guy on my right up here? His name is O'Shea. When O'Shea was 16 years old, he murdered her son. Her only child. O'Shea murdered Mary's only son. O'Shea went to prison. O'Shea wanted to talk to the mother of the person that he killed. And something in here wanted to meet him, but she kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off because, just imagine that you even want to spend a minute with somebody who killed your only child. But she finally knew she had to go and visit O'Shea in prison. And then over the course of many visits, I mean, she eloquently talks about how much she hated him. She also knew that this load of hate that she carried around on her shoulder, Jesus says, put my burden on your shoulder, take yours off. My burden is forgiveness, is unconditional, unfathomable forgiveness, because that's what God does for us. So Jesus says, put that on your shoulder, take the other one off, take your inability to forgive off. So what she does, she basically forgave him. She forgave him in her heart. He got out of prison. On the corner of 16th and Bryant, there's a fourplex. If you look at it from the front, she lives in the unit up on the top on the right, and O'Shea lives in the unit across the hall on the left. And she founded an organization that's been on all the morning talk shows on national TV. She founded an organization called From Death to Life. And it's of mothers whose children were murdered, and it's of mothers whose children murdered. And she brought those women together, women of the perpetrators, women of the victims, and basically said, as Jesus says, get that burden of your unwillingness to forgive off your back. Put my burden of compassion, mercy, love, and forgiveness on your back, because it's a whole lot lighter. It's an excellent question. My opinion about priests abusing children in the Catholic Church, it's a horrible situation. It's a scandal. It's awful. It's like this big storm cloud that hangs over the church. Actually, from 1984 until 1991, I was the Vicar General for the Archdiocese here, and that's when it started. When it came out, we had to try to do the right thing about it. And I will say this: we weren't perfect in how we addressed it, but we were relentless in terms of removing priests that we heard were doing it, getting them treated, and getting them out of ministry, never questioning a victim's story. And usually it was a family member or a friend of the victim that was telling you the story, but you never second-guessed it, you believed it, and trying to do the right thing in terms of screening people going into the seminary. It's a horrible thing. It's an awful thing. And we need, there's a reason, one of the biggest reasons for it in the tradition of the Catholic Church is a thing called clericalism. I was talking about clericalism when I was talking about the people that Jesus had to fight, who were sort of senior officials in the temple, or the bishops, Catholic or Lutheran in Germany during World War II, or the bishops that Oscar Romero had to. Clericalism is when the clergy think they're on some sort of a pedestal higher and better than other people, and they have privilege, and somehow or other you give them a pass where you wouldn't give anybody else. I'm sure it's very difficult, if not impossible, for you to understand it. I don't ask you to accept it at any level, but that's sort of the elitism of leadership gone wrong, and that has to be disassembled in the Catholic Church. You want my opinion too? I think that our priests need to be married. I think that that would make a big difference going forward in terms of eliminating that. But I do know that in every religion known to human experience, where you have clergy, leaders, who have an unbelievable amount of authority. They got God authority. And with that God authority, they can really be helpful in bringing miracles into people's lives, but they can also pervert it. So you have so much responsibility. You can do so much good, but you can do an equal amount of evil. We have to take down the clericalism in our church. I do think the not requiring our clergy to be celibate or not married would help it a long way.
It just seems un-Christian.
That's a great question. Given the fact that Jesus taught unconditional love and forgiveness, how can I reconcile that hell is taught as a form of punishment? Well, first of all, I don't agree with the popular understanding of hell, meaning people go to this eternal fiery place never to be reconciled at all with God. I don't believe in that. I think that a lot of the hell that happens is here on earth. It's perpetrated by human hate and human injustice, and there are lots of people that are forced to live through a certain hell, and frankly the perpetrators themselves are. What I do believe, and I don't know if you've read in here, there's a story in here that Father Bellamy talks about Narnia. It's a fascinating story because what's embedded in on the one hand, if you're gonna preach God's unconditional loving forgiveness, so then how do you deal with injustice? How do you deal with a world where a government wants to basically annihilate a certain group of people, and all kinds of people are complicit in that? I mean, huge, horrible injustice. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with taking a person's life? What Narnia talks about and what is suggested is let's let God figure it out in terms of some form of reconciliation in God's time and in God's way, where all of us are ultimately drawn through, if you will, some sort of cleansing, if you will, experience on our way into God's eternal embrace of love. That's really a human question. How do you balance injustice with unconditional forgiveness? I believe it because in our belief, the role of priests, very large responsibility. First of all, it's discriminatory. It's gender discriminatory. That's number one. But number two is that a priest has a very, very important role, just as a minister does in Protestant religion. Preaching is probably the way that 98% of Christians hear about their faith. It's supposed to be instructional. It's supposed to be motivating and inspiring. So if that's true, I don't think it's right. By the way, the only people that can preach in the Catholic Church are deacons, priests, and bishops. I mean, stand up at the pulpit on Sunday, comment on the scripture, teach, and motivate. Priests, deacons, and bishops. Priests and bishops are not married, and they're all men. Deacons can be married, but they're all men. It's not right that you take the scripture, the words of Jesus, and instruct people and motivate them through the mind, the ears, the eyes, and the mouth only of unmarried men. It's a narrow focus on life. We need to be able to have all of this taught through the person, through women, through men, through married people, through unmarried people. So it's an injustice. It's a second injustice. There's been a really interesting back and forth about that question since the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. And Martin Luther and the Protestants have really posed that question. It's all about works versus grace, they say. They say that Catholics believe that you've got to work your way into heaven. You know, your good deeds will get you into heaven. Martin Luther's fundamental teaching is no amount of good deeds is going to get you into heaven. You know, it is the freely given, loving grace of God that redeems you. But then that redemption that happens in your heart best evidence itself in a life lived according to Jesus' teaching. But the good acts don't get you into heaven in and of themselves. So what's happened over the 500 years since the 16th century is between the Catholics and the Protestants, for the most part, we've balanced it out. Catholics don't believe literally that you're not going to get to heaven unless you do these good works. We do believe in the saving grace of God's love. But we do the works to be an expression of the feeling of that salvation. The sadness, if I can try to answer it this way, the sadness is that, I don't know about you, but when I look in the mirror in the morning, I'm looking at a somewhat, if not significantly, broken person. Some days, I got it together. Other days, no way. So what Bonhoeffer is basically saying is the leadership of this religion, namely the Lutheran religion in Germany at the time, is selling out. Your unwillingness to call out Hitler and the Nazi regime in terms of what it's doing to Jews and to gypsies and to developmentally disabled people and to homosexual people is radically wrong. Shape up, take them on. So what I try to say is that you just watch religions over history and you've got a whole collection of individuals, many of whom don't have the courage to stand up and call out evil. And that is, it's evil in itself, and it's predictably part of the ongoing human condition. It's got to be called out. Some people have done it dramatically, hopefully to inspire the rest of us. So, thanks.
I would just add, Christianity often goes too far in one direction. We've got to be about justice. Sometimes we go too far and we start judging people. That's not right. Sometimes we go too far in the direction of mercy and we become kind of a doormat. We just think, oh, to be a Christian is to be like the most super nice, accepting, inclusive, oh my God, everybody's cool. And that's too far. You can't, there's not just one answer. You have to do justice and mercy both. And figuring out where that is very hard. It's very hard.